Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today we are going to be discussing the poetry volumes that I read last week. As many of you know, I am on a hunt this year to find poetry that I enjoy, so I am committing to reading a couple poetry volumes each week to try to see if I can discern what kind of poetry I like and what sort of poetry I don't like. So that is one of my goals this year. I kind of started over the summer, so I haven't been doing this the entirety of 2025, but I have been doing it for long enough, and I have been doing it for long enough to admit that I am in a little bit of a tough spot with this poetry challenge. So I'm finding that I really feel overwhelmed with the amount of poetry out there and how I do not know what I'm looking for because I do not know what I like. This is unlike other genres where I have a clear idea of things I enjoy and things I don't enjoy, probably by virtue of the fact that I have read so much in my life, but in poetry, a genre or a style that I don't read a lot in, I have a lot less to fall back on, and I'm really struggling to find poetry that I enjoy. Now, I understand that poetry is kind of a monolithic term and there's a lot underneath of it, and that's one of the reasons I actually started this challenge. I knew that there was a lot that I didn't like, or there were things that I didn't like in poetry, which is why I avoided the whole genre, essentially. But it's such a large genre, I guess you could say. I'm not sure if genre or medium is the more correct term here, but it's such a large, or it's very broad. So there's a lot that can be contained within the category of poetry, to the point where saying that I don't like poetry just felt too, I don't know if reductive is that even a word? I don't know what I'm saying. Basically, I was pretty sure that that was going too far. So one of my goals was to try to find something that I enjoy, because there have been individual or one-off poems that I have enjoyed in the past. So I wanted to try to hone in and see exactly what I did like and didn't like, and if I could find any sort of overarching theme or just better understand what my preferences are. And something that I'm finding is, maybe I'm not approaching this right, but there's just so much and I really don't like a lot of it, if I'm really being honest. Or there are times where I'm reading things and I'm like, this is fine, this is acceptable, this is enjoyable even, but I'm not really sure I'd gravitate towards it. So we're gonna discuss the poetry volumes that I read this week. We'll start with, we won't do these necessarily in order, but we'll start with the two by Rumi. So I am trying to incorporate some poetry volumes that are maybe more in the classic category, because those two do tend to be ones that I do enjoy. There were poems that I read in, say, high school English class or literature class that I didn't mind. So maybe reading stuff that was older, that maybe haven't stood the test of time per se, I would have better luck in finding something that I enjoyed. But I'm not sure if that is the case. Now, I didn't dislike either of these volumes, but there were not really a whole lot of poems that stood out as like, oh, I really like it. There were maybe a handful in this one, and there was not really any in this one. And they weren't really bad, but I didn't find myself gravitating towards either of these. This one, I did like the cover, but these, and I don't know if it was just the selection or what it was, these interested me less than the poems that were selected in these. So this is Rumi, We Are Three, translated by Coleman Barks. And this is Rumi Unseen Poems. I don't know who translated and edited by Brad Gooch and Miriam Mortaz. So it's a different selection, and for whatever reason, I preferred the selection in this one quite a bit more than this one. However, even this one I read over the course of several days, and there was only a small handful, maybe only one, that really popped out as enjoyable, and neither of them really strongly were ones that I gravitated towards. So both of these were kind of a struggle to get through in that sense, where I find if I really enjoy a book, there's no issue or no struggle with me trying to read it. So both of these kind of were a wash, or like, I didn't dislike them, but I'm not really sure if this is like going to be a top tier poet that I'm going to keep returning to again and again, even though there are one-off ones that I enjoy. The other one that I read this week was Back Roads to Far Places by Ferlinghetti. There's no cover. It's here. There might be a cover, but the library removed it for like protection purposes, which they sometimes do. I think, having read the entry on, I think it was Goodreads, I believe this is very like Japanese inspired with like the calligraphy pens, and I believe this is all pens. This one, there was one that I really liked, and the pages are unhelpfully not very numbered, but there wasn't really a whole lot. It was this one, what is that strange sense of yearning, passing lighted houses at night, loneliness sets its own lamp alight. But there really isn't much else in this one that appealed to me, which going into this one, I did not know anything about this Ferlinghetti individual, but I guess he's quite well known. And actually lived to be 101, so good on him for having a good long life. I believe he also painted, if I read that correctly. So he seemed to be quite artistically tuned in and well respected. But again, this one did not appeal to me very much. I only finished it really because of how short it was. I was about halfway through and I was like, this one really is not for me. But it was so short that I did decide to finish it. Or maybe, you know, you think, especially with a poetry collection, unlike a prose book, just because the first half of the book doesn't appeal to you doesn't mean the best poem you've ever read in your life isn't in the second half of the book, because there's usually an overarching theme, but the poetry is kind of disjointed. That's not the word I'm looking for, but it's just because you dislike a poem on page 13 doesn't mean the best one you haven't read isn't on page 53. Well, if you're reading in contrast, if you're reading a novel, if you don't like any of the characters or the way things are being written in the first half of the book, it's unlikely that things are really going to turn around in the second half of the book. So I am more inclined, or I do find myself more inclined to finish poetry volumes that I start because of that reason. But none of these really drew me in. None of these made me really excited to read. And I am still searching for a good poetry collection. So if you have any suggestions or any comments on what I've read so far, I would love to hear it. I am currently reading this one for this week, Primordial by Mai Dervang. I genuinely only got this for the cover. I'm not even going to lie. I thought it was kind of fun. I started reading it this morning when I got up, sat in bed with my cup of coffee and did the first 25 pages. And so far it's another one that's just fine. And I'm really struggling to find poetry collections that climb out of the fine category. I will also say that I do notice that I tend to not like things that are very ethereal or abstract. I think like poetry that's more concrete. That is something I have discovered. And I also discovered that I don't like, and this is true for music too, I don't like things that are very longing, melancholy, or things that are overly sad, I guess. I feel like I'm quite optimistic as a person, personally, in my personal life, and I don't really gravitate towards like excessively listening to things like sad songs. I don't get that cathartic release I think a lot of people do when listening to sad music or reading a sad poem. Maybe there's like one or two that I like that might remind me of something that I like, but I don't really gravitate towards that. And I find that some of these poetry collections I pick up do tend to be very sad. So that's something else that I'm running into. But if you have any thoughts or comments, please leave in the comment section down below. I love to receive your comments. They really do make my day. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.